When it came to the Wii's launch lineup, one game that stood out was Red Steel. It offered what seemed like seamless sword and gunplay that took advantage of the console's unique controller. While we all know how that panned out, it was a huge disappointment. Luckily, a few years later, and thanks to the implementation of Wii Motion Plus, Ubisoft had another stab at the game, which finally brought its original concept to life. There's about 7 chapters in the game, and each has you completing missions around several unique and individual areas. A fair amount of different enemy types are gradually introduced throughout the game's duration, which all offer up their own threat to deal with. The swordplay of Red Steel 2 works very well. There's a wide assortment of ways to attack with your trusty blade. You can stab enemies, do weak attacks or broad motions with your arm to perform strong blows, and then mix it up with a few shots of your pistol. It's a really satisfying system. When it comes to presentation, Red Steel 2 supports a stunning cel shade art style with beautiful vistas, towns and other areas. Everything is colourful, crisp and wonderful to look at, and is all complemented by an impressive mix of Old West meets Ancient East, and thankfully when the action heats up, there's not a sniff of slowdown to ruin the experience. If you pass this one by, it's still worth picking up and giving a go to this day. Muramasa is the spiritual successor to Odin Sphere on the PS2, and is a side-scroller with a big focus on beautiful and stylistic visuals. The gameplay is where Muramasa departs most notably from Odin Sphere. Combat itself has been completely revamped, and it's a change for the better. Where Odin Sphere's combat was elegant in its simplicity, featuring simple to learn attacks coupled with a need for strategy and how to engage the enemies, Muramasa takes the opposite route and gives you a wide variety of fighting abilities and attack options which string together seamlessly. The controls are incredibly tight and the fighting moves all suitably fluid. When it comes to visuals, the game is truly a work of art, with bright, gorgeous backgrounds and heavily detailed characters and locales. The game is based on Japanese mythology, so everything from the soundtrack to the characters draw heavily from Japanese culture. In the graphical department, this leads to some rather nice touches, featuring Japanese-style architecture, mythological creatures and townspeople. Veterans of Odin Sphere will be pleased to know that the occasional problems with frame rate slowdown have been removed, which is quite impressive considering that Muramasa's combat is even more visually engaging and the environments are even more detailed than its predecessor. If you're looking for one of the best action RPGs on the Wii, Muramasa has got it all. The Wii was home to a wide range of incredible RPGs, but when it comes to sheer visual fidelity, The Last Story is the clear winner. Coming from the father of the genre himself, Hironobu Sakaguchi, The Last Story weaves an incredible tale of romance, politics and survival that all takes place on the fictional island of Lezulis. It follows a band of mercenaries that consist of 6 unique individuals that all possess their own backstories and naturally hidden agendas. The game is largely split up into chapters, with the game taking around 30 hours to complete if you choose not to tackle the extensive side content that's on offer as well. As with many RPGs, the gameplay is front and center. The Last Story fully succeeds in creating an engrossing and rewarding system. It's all presented in real time, with each character having access to a wide selection of abilities that help lay waste to the onslaught of enemies throughout the campaign. Now when it comes to visuals, The Last Story simply is gorgeous. It's one of the prettiest games on the Wii, only rivaling that of Super Mario Galaxy and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Every character is rendered to the point where you can see every little detail of their faces or bodies that's depicted through the realistic graphic engine that the game showcases. As with most RPGs, the story elements are split into cinematics as well as real-time cutscenes. Both look phenomenal and at times you can't even tell the difference. Mistwalker should truly be commended at how much they pushed the Wii's hardware to its utmost limit. The Last Story really proves that horsepower isn't everything, but instead solid aesthetics and gameplay systems more than make up for what may be lacking when it comes to visuals. The first thing that I and many other gamers noticed with Kirby's Epic Yarn when it was first shown to the public was the game's art design. Everything in Kirby's new world of Patchland is composed of yarn and fabric, creating a world that feels like a tapestry come to life. Kirby's own body is made of a pink yarn outline, with other characters and enemies composed of similar textures. Echoing the paper design of the famed Paper Mario series, Kirby's Epic Yarn uses the yarn and fabric aesthetic to create a beautifully charming charming game. Kirby's form allows the pink puffball to transform into other objects like a tank, car or submarine, each one with buttery smooth animations that capture the creativity and flexibility of Yang. How Kirby and his crew change shapes so fluidly is one thing, but when Kirby earns certain power-ups or uses certain environmental objects, the game truly feels captivating in its visual charm. To top this off, the sound design is light-hearted, with Kirby and crew sounding off frequently with uplifting quips and undeniably light-hearted level themes. Even the narrator who tells of Kirby's story is encouraging, fleshing out the world like a benevolent figure reading a fairy tale book to a gathered group of people. The aesthetic and presentation of Kirby's epic yarn is, without question, one of the most creative designs on any console. That's sure to make even the grumpiest fucker crack a smile. In a nutshell, Mad World is a shockingly violent, blatantly vulgar, and insanely fun action game designed for the Nintendo Wii, and for those who have even the slightest appeal towards action games, it will satisfy that bloodlust that all of us have deep down inside. Now when it comes to gameplay, it thankfully doesn't overuse Wii remote waving like so many other games suffered from. All of your actions are mapped to the face buttons, apart from swinging the Wii remote either vertically or horizontally to perform back fists and special moves, as well as to tear up with your chainsaw. The most apparent factor in Mad World is its graphical style, which follows a simple monochromatic base with plenty of blood to paint the town with. Many have compared this to a noir comic book style, and while it does capture that idea, Mad World mixes in plenty of violent bloodshed for good measure. Cutscenes blend in comic book style panels with full motion sequences, which add a clever atmosphere to the game. The game's style follows in Clover Studios' footsteps, with some great shading and design effects reminiscent of the wonderfully stylized Beautiful Joe series. Giant words blast during action-packed sequences, and subtle details like main character Jack's cigarette smoke add a brilliant bit of unique essence to the game's incredible graphic design. The game animates fluidly in action, and the cinematic kills flow together cleanly and smoothly. There is a small notice of lag when things get too heavy, but overall this is some of the best the Wii has to offer, not just technically but stylistically as well. Despite being named underpowered, the Wii has shown plenty of unique styles and aesthetics when it comes to graphics, and Mad World is probably one of the most ambitious. The original Metroid Prime was the first game in the series that ventured into the 3D space. After 2 incredible adventures, all eyes were on Retro Studios to see what could be done with the next installment and how it would take advantage of the Wii's unique hardware. Now at its core, it's essentially a first-person shooter, but with many adventure and puzzle elements thrown in to help it stand out. The Wii remote was front and center, with Metroid Prime 3 making good use of every ability the controller offered. It is hands down one of the most seamless and enjoyable FPS experiences on a console, and because of the easy pick up and play nature of the game, it opened it up to many people that otherwise wouldn't have given it a second look. One aspect that really stands out though are the visuals. At first glance you might not notice a difference between Metroid Prime 2 and 3, but 10 minutes in and looking closely, you'll quickly discover that the two are not even in the same league. Light rips through the skies and cloud to show the impressive quality of the lighting effects used. Character models are detailed to a fault. The arm cannon of Samus even reflects and shines with a new glimmer. Everything just has such a crisp and clean look that definitely makes you feel like everything has been turned up to 11. However, graphics are not always about textures, triangles and polygons. Art direction and style is the other half of the equation, and let me just say, you won't find a game that does it better. If you've played one of the previous Prime games on the GameCube, or even any Metroid game, you should know how downright amazing the atmosphere is. Metroid Prime 3 welcomes you back with open arms, detailed spaceships, lively character designs, complex machinery, worlds varying from naval stations to fiery jungles and cloud cities, with each of them having a distinct vibe. If you never got round to playing this one on the Wii, it's still worth picking up now, and here's hoping if Nintendo ever get their fingers out of their ass, we'll eventually get a remake or remaster on the Switch. If you're at all accustomed to Eco on the PS2, Lost in Shadow will feel oddly familiar. It takes many cues from that game and aims to deliver non-conventional exposition and a sense of mystery. Yet Lost in Shadow doesn't possess the emotional core of Eco, and doesn't ever reveal too much information. It's all handled by several narrated segments that convey the general premise of the game, which involves the player having to reach their body after their shadow is severed from it. When it comes to gameplay, it's essentially a 2D platform puzzler, which allows you to jump, crawl and attack in a variety of ways. It's not overly sophisticated, but what it does present, it executes well, with the crux of the gameplay coming from the several interactive segments that play with light and shadow. You're accompanied by a butterfly who can be manipulated with the Wii remote, and can interact with several objects that allow the boy to progress. For example, if there is a gap, the player can alter the positioning of an object so its shadow lines up and allows the player to proceed. Now visually, Lost in Shadow doesn't do much to take advantage of the Wii hardware, but the lighting and general aesthetic of the game world really help propel it into one of the best looking games on the system. Every object in the game world casts a real, accurate shadow which operates in real time. The shadows bend and wind around 3D objects, causing you to adjust your way of looking at things from time to time. As I mentioned, it's not groundbreakingly gorgeous, but the way shadow and light have been implemented make it worthy of a mention. After the huge success of the first game, it was a bit of a no-brainer that Nintendo would continue with the concept that made Galaxy such a joy to play. Much like its predecessor, the game is once again split up into several galaxies for the player to explore, with each of them offering a different experience for the most part. The galaxies themselves range from massive, fully explorable levels to disjointed planetoids both big and small in size, and as you make your way through each one, you'll find different challenges and different aspects to the gameplay that keep it fresh. In some areas you may need to power up with some old and new abilities to make your way through. These abilities range from the classic fireballs to the returning Bee and Boo power-ups, and even some new ideas such as the cloud and rock powers. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is best described as a feast of colour for the eyes. Once again, Nintendo delivered one of the best looking games on the Wii, and with such a wide variety of locales, the game never ceases to amaze. The vibrant hues and details on the characters themselves are a visual treat, from the impressive shading to the advanced lighting, which proves once again that it's not always about horsepower, but instead about solid design and imagination that help the overall presentation of a game. This really is the definitive Mario game on the system, and even all of these years later, it's still just as fun to play. Fragile Dreams is best described as an atmospheric adventure. In truth, the game really does merge elements of the horror, action, adventure and RPG genres, but none of these are very strong. While the game is incredibly atmospheric, it settles for being eerie and lonely as opposed to being more horrific like Silent Hill for example. Now the story takes place in a world that has begun to decay. The civilized world is slowly falling apart without maintenance, with the player taking control of a young boy named Sito, who seeks to find someone else in this empty world so he's not alone. And loneliness is the feeling that the world will evoke. Though you may be walking the city streets at one point, it may as well be a ghost town, and the game makes it completely believable. While exploration is quite enjoyable, the same can't be said for combat. It is functional and offers up 4 weapon types such as long poles, heavy and blunt objects, as well as some ranged options, but it's just too damn slow. Add to this that you have to actually pause the game to change your weapon, and it all just becomes rather unintuitive. One saving grace and largely the most impressive aspect of Fragile Dreams though has to be the visuals. While there are instances where you can really feel that you're playing a Wii title, there are other moments which will simultaneously drop your jaw. Obviously, since one of the central gameplay mechanics revolves around light, they paid close attention to this. The light controls and behaves very realistically in the game, and complements the incredible amount of work that was put into each environment. They're all very carefully detailed and extremely believable. It's the little details that are paid attention to that all add up to create an intoxicating experience. The Legend of Zelda has always been one of Nintendo's flagship franchises, and after the critically acclaimed Twilight Princess, many were wondering where it would go next. Skyward Sword was the answer, and just like the Wind Waker, it did at first annoy many players that it was leaving behind the darker tone of the previous entry and instead offering up a more playful approach. This wasn't the only change, as the fundamental structure of the adventure was completely reworked as well, and instead revolved around a sort of central hub known as Skyloft, where the player could visit several locations by leaping to the world below. Skyward Sword's visual presentation is handled so well that it actually looks genuinely beautiful. Instead of looking like a PS3 or a 360 game with a dramatically reduced polygon count and lower resolution, Skyward Sword knows the limit of the hardware and works around them. Objects are simplified and very crisp, partially averting problems of blocky objects and blurry textures. Of course, there's nothing you can do about the lack of HD, but a nice blurring effect begins to make that question less relevant. Also, the new art style fits the game perfectly. Some have described it as an amalgamation of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker because of how it's neither cartoony or realistic, but in reality it's its own beast entirely. The world explodes with bright colours, especially in the forest and river areas. Distant scenery runs together and truly looks like a watercolour painting. Each environment is dazzling in its own right and uses colour to enhance the mood and create a distinct identity. Skyward Sword is easily not only the most varied in the series, but also quite simply the best. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and tickle that bell. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos as well and to take part in giveaways. You can also join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Daniel and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon for extra content, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.